Allen Lund Company has new offices in Ogden, Utah and Indianapolis, Indiana. Check allenlund.com to reach them.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
Diesel prices are up for the first time in more than 2 months, and the U.S. Department of Labor is stepping in with a port strike looming next week. We'll get the details on those and more from Scott Thompson and Landline Magazine's Jamie Jones. How do you make sure that highways that pass through avalanche-prone areas are safe in the winter? One way is to create planned avalanches. I'll discuss a new way of doing that with Stephen Clark of the Utah Department of Transportation. Sometimes people really need a second chance. One place that's true is in court. So how do you do that and what's involved? I'll get some details from David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal. And finally, 3 important pieces of legislation supported by OOIDA dealing with issues such as freight fraud have made it out of committee in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'll talk with Bryce Munchen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. The national average for a gallon of diesel up for the first time in more than 2 months last week. The Energy Information Administration says the average was up a little more than a cent to $3.53. It's a slight increase, but an increase nonetheless, breaking a 10-week streak of declines. Prices up in 4 regions and down in 6. ProMiles.com, meanwhile, had the average Tuesday morning at $3.51 a gallon, down nearly 3 cents compared to the same day last week. And we are looking ahead to next Tuesday for another reason. That's when about 45,000 dock workers at 3 dozen ports along the East and Gulf Coasts have threatened to walk off the job. Negotiations have stalled there, and despite the White House previously indicating it would not get involved, the Labor Department reached out to the U.S. Maritime Alliance on Monday to see how it might be able to help. If that strike happens, supply chain disruptions are a certainty. Shifting now to the basic per diem for owner-operators. It's going up starting next week. Let's bring in Jamie Jones, managing editor of Landline Magazine, for the details. Jamie, good to see you.
Hey, good to be here, Scott.
So right now, as we speak, the per diem for meals and incidentals is $69. It's been at that level for, I think, 2 years now. But the IRS is raising it about 16% starting October 1st to $80. A point of emphasis here, Jamie, this is for owner-operators, not company drivers. That's very important to note.
Yeah, that really is, because for many, many, many years, this per diem, which you can deduct for each day you're on the road, a full day, you can deduct 80%, I believe, of the 80% of the $80. And if you're gone a partial day, you can deduct 75%. And that's a big savings for anybody who's out on the road as much as you are. And, so you can spend up to $80 per day on meals and incidentals while you're away from home on the truck. And what happened, like I said, for years and years and years, company drivers had access to this same deduction as owner-operators did. And it was really unfortunate because the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, and that's a Trump-era tax cut bill, actually the language eliminated this deduction for company drivers. And given the intent behind that piece of legislation, it really felt like there was some confusion on the part of lawmakers and how this got passed and stuff. I really, it's not often that I try and give Congress credit for not fully getting something that they're doing, but this one, it really kind of felt that way. And there's fortunately some effort to change that back.
Yeah, and that's the Tax Fairness for Workers Act. It's a bipartisan bill. It's actually both in the House and the Senate. The House version, 200 co-sponsors at last check. The Senate version, 40 co-sponsors. And essentially, and we've talked about this on the show before, but essentially this would reverse that change and give company drivers per diem back.
Oh, 100%. And if there was ever an opportunity for a trucker to really get a point across with their lawmaker or their lawmaker staff, a legislative aide on this particular issue. I mean, per diems are just how travel happens in the corporate world. So that's a language they can already speak, and to let them know that you as a company driver do not have access to this huge deduction, yet you are faced with the same hurdles as an owner-operator out on the road in terms of the meals and incidentals. You have to eat while you're out on the road, especially if you're out for any, significant period of time. I don't think, if you're on a 24 fast and going to hit the house, I guess, but, theoretically, you should still be able to claim that deduction on the per diem. So it's something that we've gotten their attention. OOIDA has worked extremely hard in the background to make sure that we're getting attention. But as with any standalone bill, you have to keep working on it.
Yeah, and it is worth pointing out that this, again, both the House version and the Senate version have a lot of support right now. Again, 200 co-sponsors in the House and 40 in the Senate. We see a lot of bills out there that kind of, are around for a while and pick up, a supporter maybe every couple months or so. And this one picked up steam pretty quickly and has a lot of support. So maybe, to your point, maybe lawmakers kind of realize, we messed up a little bit here back in 2017, and they want to, correct that wrong.
Well, and I mean, it's just the reality. Typically, company drivers do not make as much take home as an owner-operator who is running a successful business. Let's put an asterisk on that. A successful owner-operator. And to take away something that would be this beneficial as a deduction certainly hurts. I think the one thing that we always need to point out when you're talking about deductions or anything like that, you need to be talking to a tax professional who is familiar with trucking regulations and what's allowable for truck drivers. I don't recommend going into a big box store to one of those little kiosk tax outfits that are cranking people through.
Sure, yeah.
Because there are benefits to per diems, there are drawbacks to per diems, and you need to know how that's going to affect your bottom line and your income if you're making any big moves in the future.
Yeah.
So, and along with all of this, and I know everybody's going to love this part, there is a definite paperwork, a paper keeping aspect, if you will, that comes up with this per diem, because you have to prove that you were truly away on all of those. So, stay with your tax preparer that knows about trucking if you're going to be messing with per diems.
Yeah, and a shameless tease here, Truck to Success, October 22nd. That's a hugely popular part of that seminar, is the tax part of it, because as you point out, it's complicated. There's a lot of ins and outs. There are a lot of opportunities to actually save some money there. And this per diem obviously is one aspect of that conversation that goes on. During that, you can check out more information at truck2success.com. And the per diem certainly will be talked about there. But again, the takeaway here, for owner-operators, October 1st, the per diem tax deduction going up to $80. And we've got more on landline.media. Jamie, we appreciate your time, and we'll see you again soon.
Hey, not a problem, Scott.
And to get your lawmaker on board with that bill, the Tax Fairness for Workers Act, you can head to fightingfortruckers.com and click on the key trucking legislation tab at the top of the page. Again, that was Jamie Jones of Landline Magazine, and we thank her for her time. And speaking of that website, you can also use it to encourage more support for H.R. 3869 in the House. That is the Trucker Bathroom Access Act. It just picked up another co-sponsor, bringing the total there to 11. The bipartisan bill is about as simple as it gets. It would not require any new funding. It would simply require that shippers and receivers make their bathrooms available to truckers who are dropping off or loading up at their facilities. All the latest trucking news 24/7 on our website, landline.media. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. Next, Stephen Clark of the Utah Department of Transportation discusses the state's new method to control avalanches. I'll cover how to get your second chance in court with David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal, and we'll hear about 3 important bills in Congress from Bryce Mungin of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. We'll be back in a moment. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman is your leading source for quality remanufactured engines and components. Capital Reman stands ready to serve all OOIDA members to help reduce costly engine repairs or replacement. Visit capitalreman.com today and use code OOIDA10 to save.
Penske is the trusted source for quality used trucks. Whether you search our website, call our sales staff, or bid at our online auction, you are sure to find the right used truck for your business. Visit PenskeUsedTrucks.com to view our inventory and learn more.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. If you go on YouTube, you can see a lot of things that people rarely saw in the past. One of those things involves avalanches that are common in some parts of the nation's mountains during winter months. However, in some of those areas, highways pass through. So knowing when those avalanches are going to happen, again, something virtually impossible in days past, is an important part of highway safety for transportation officials. So how do you do that? Well, you start an avalanche so that it happens in a way that you control the timing, allowing highways to be cleared of traffic. One of the states that has to do this type of thing on a fairly regular basis is Utah. Recently, that state changed how they start those artificial avalanches to make them safer. I recently talked with Stephen Clark, the Avalanche Safety Program Manager for the Utah Department of Transportation.
In a lot of western states and mountain areas, roadways travel through steep mountain terrain that get a lot of snowfall, and those avalanche paths can naturally trigger and impact an open roadway. So the goal of our DOT program and DOT avalanche programs in general is to basically prevent avalanches from crossing an open roadway. And so we do that with, so in order to do that, we need to somewhat time when those avalanches happen, and we need to be able to trigger those avalanches when the roadway is closed and there's no people or vehicles in the way. We can trigger that avalanche and then clean up whatever debris is left over. And that is really the goal of why we're out there triggering avalanches and starting avalanches, is we want to be able to somewhat predict the timing of when those occur. And so, through a long history of avalanche forecasting, we've come to understand things about snow science and weather patterns that lead to the development of increased avalanche hazard. And we kind of have those typical avalanche areas mapped out, and they come from known locations. So it's actually, of all the natural hazards, it's one of the only ones that we can kind of really control when the destruction happens. Certainly at a certain point, certain storm systems and snowpack conditions are too hazardous that we just have to kind of step back and let a storm system run its course. But for the most part, we're able to kind of forecast when those conditions are going to happen and do mitigation work when needed.
And I've seen a lot of various videos of avalanches out west, and it just seems to me like a lot of the roads out there, and probably just because the land is level, but they're down at the bottom of a lot of these valleys and canyons where the land is flat, which makes them kind of a target for this, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And so in a lot of the roads, especially in Little Cottonwood Canyon here in Utah, the roadway is actually in what's called the track of the avalanche path. So it's actually where the avalanche is still accelerating. And that's, so the roadway was historically built as an old mine, a railroad that was pulled up and down with mules. So they needed the gradient of the roadway to be as kind of consistent as possible. And so in order to do that and keep it up out of the creek bottom, and they kind of cut the road right through a lot of these big avalanche paths. So that's that's one of the reasons why Little Cottonwood is so prone to avalanches.
Now, of course, we're talking here today about the new method for triggering these avalanches, but I was kind of fascinated by the old method you've been using. Can you describe that?
Sure, yeah. So, historically in Little Cottonwood Canyon, we've used various methods to trigger avalanches. The one that people think about most is we've used military artillery of various types. From a fixed location, we can shoot war surplus ammunition to trigger those avalanches. So currently we're using 105 millimeter howitzers to do that work. Then, we don't own the weapons. We lease them from the U.S. military. The U.S. military does all the maintenance. They control what training protocols we do with that equipment. And so the artillery is an incredibly effective tool. There's a couple issues with artillery, which is kind of the big reason to move away from artillery is the ammunition we're using is made to fragment into hundreds of pieces and thousands of pieces. It's designed to kill people. So when we, in a lot of the areas where we do avalanche mitigation work are also places where people want to go ski recreationally. And so if you're happen to be in a closed area at the wrong place at the wrong time, you could get hit by that fragmentation. The other issue in Little Cottonwood is that there's a lot of buildings and people and hotels and resort infrastructure. And so we're actually firing live artillery shells over inhabited buildings with people inside of them. And that's the only place in the country that's doing that, not in a war setting. So that was the big push for UDOT to start this implementation of a new technology to reduce our dependence on artillery. So we'll still be using artillery in some locations, but largely we've eliminated over 95% of that overhead building fire with this new mitigation technology.
Why don't you go ahead and describe this new system? What are the various components that make it up, and how does it work?
So it sort of falls under this umbrella type of equipment called a remote avalanche control system. And there are a couple different types and styles. One is a gas-based system, so something that combines oxygen, propane, or oxygen and hydrogen to create a pressure wave. And then there are explosive-based systems, so that whether they launch a projectile into the snow or they hang an explosive projectile over the snow, those are the two different types. UDOT has both types. This system that we installed this summer on Mount Superior, it's an explosive-based system. It's called a Wyssen system, a Wyssen tower, Wyssen. And so what it is it's essentially it's a 30 meter or it's a 10 meter tall tower or 30 feet that it looks similar to what a ski lift tower, if you know what that looks like. So it's got a ladder on the one side, and on the top of this tower, it has a kind of a special mount and then what it gets placed on top of that is called a deployment box. So in the deployment box, so that tower is kind of constructed and lives up in an avalanche starting zone permanently. So it just stays there. And so what gets set on top of it is called the deployment box. And so that gets loaded with 12 explosive charges and then gets picked up by a helicopter and then set on top of that tower without any people having to be actually on the ground to do anything. And so once that deployment box is mounted on the tower, we can remotely connect to that equipment and start a firing sequence when we need to. And so that's kind of the high level version of how that equipment works. And so it's a very effective method. It creates a very big area of effect, so we can have fewer pieces of equipment to cover the same amount of area. Historically, we had had like over 30 howitzer kind of target locations, whereas we're kind of covering that area with 16 of these towers. So it's about as minimal of a coverage as you can get in that piece of terrain.
Well, and you mentioned that some of these systems do use projectiles of some kind, but I would assume they're non-military and they don't fragment.
Exactly. Yeah. So this explosive system it's a commercially available system. It doesn't have the fragmentation issues. So if someone happens to be in the wrong place, we certainly go to great lengths to not have people there, but we don't have to worry about the fragmentation issue, and then we don't have to worry about the potential for an artillery round to fly short of its target and hit a building.
Okay. I know that a lot of agencies, when they look at new systems like this, they'll conduct a cost-benefit analysis. Sure. Did your department do that, and how did the costs compare with the benefits?
We certainly did a cost-benefit analysis. Unfortunately, the artillery it by far and away is a cheaper system. We've been very lucky to have very reasonable maintenance and operations costs with that artillery, but the safety risks really sort of far outweighed that cost savings component. So these systems that we installed are much more expensive. To especially this initial installation cost. And I would say, when we first put in our artillery mount locations, building those buildings was quite expensive. So it's somewhat similar. The annual operating cost is probably going to be like 30 or 40% more than what we have been using with that artillery. But the safety benefits of this system far outweigh the added cost, and it justifies it.
I wonder if you can give us an idea of where this is being deployed, not only the name of the place, but kind of for people that aren't familiar with the state's geography, kind of what highways are passing through the area, what is the closest town, and so on.
Sure, yeah. So the UDOT Avalanche program is, in Little Cottonwood Canyon and Big Cottonwood Canyon, it's in the Salt Lake Valley. So we're only, I want to say it's like 30 miles as a crow flies away from the state capitol in Salt Lake Valley. So we're very close to this very large metropolitan area. I think there's over 2 million people that live in the Salt Lake Valley now. And so the canyon, Little Cottonwood Canyon, it's an east-west oriented canyon. The Salt Lake Valley is kind of a north-south oriented valley. And then I-15 runs through the center of Salt Lake Valley. And in the Little Cottonwood Canyon, this roadway is called SR210. And so it's a big, nice glacially carved kind of U-shaped canyon. And so it has really, really steep sides. And then it has this kind of nice, gentle kind of valley bottom. And there's 2 ski areas located at the top of this canyon, Alta and Snowbird ski areas. So that's where most of the people who are coming up the canyon are going to those ski areas in the wintertime and to recreate on various national forest landscapes, to hike or bike or whatever they want to do. So that's kind of that general orientation. Most of the avalanche areas are kind of right in that kind of Salt Lake Valley, Wasatch Front area, but there are some avalanche areas in the center part of the state, near I-70, and then farther south than that near like the Arizona border in St. George.
Are you treating this as a test, or have you already started to look at other places you might put a system like this?
We really see these as ways to eliminate our use on military artillery. There are areas. So the one issue with putting these systems in other places is that in locations that is a designated wilderness area, so a designated wilderness area by the United States government, basically that has a lot more restrictions on what type of activities happen there. And so right now, the wilderness rule basically says that you can't install any kind of man-made infrastructure in a wilderness area. And there are exceptions around the country to that, but in general, like new construction generally is not allowed. And so right now, we still shoot our artillery into locations that are wilderness areas. We have it's part of our special use permit to do that. But in order to, if we really had to fully get away from artillery, there would have to be some kind of major legislative change to the Wilderness Act to be able, or we would have to get some kind of legislative exemption to put that equipment there. So certainly some other locations we're looking to implement this equipment, but right now we're very much invested in this equipment now. We've kind of been slowly implementing these systems over the past 10 years. And so, this system that we put in this summer is the last big area for Little Cottonwood. And so we don't have any plans in the near future to install any more of these systems.
Okay, great. Well, Steve, that's all I have. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem.
I've been talking with Stephen Clark, the Avalanche Safety Program Manager for the Utah Department of Transportation. Once again, the installation of the new avalanche mitigation system is underway now and expected to be completed by sometime in October. No major road closures are expected, but short-term closures in both directions of State Route 210 near Alta are likely. You can learn more about the project at its website. We'll have a direct link on our website, landlinenow.com. We'll be back in just a moment with more of the show. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Truckdown.com. Whenever you have a breakdown, you need Truckdown.com. 24/7 access to 40,000 verified heavy-duty repair vendors nationwide.
Repair secured,
Load assured. Truckdown.com.
Firestone tires are for more of everything, with more durability for more miles and more confidence in your fleet. Firestone's tested tires help fleets save with value where it matters most. Learn more at bridgestonenationalfleet.com/4moremiles.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a cat scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy, weigh your truck on a cat scale.
Oprah Winfrey once said that if you're still breathing, you have a second chance. And sometimes people really need a second chance. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddick. Welcome back to the program. One of the places where many people want and really need that second chance is in court. But that's a place where sometimes those second chances can be hard to come by. But you can sometimes get one. And one of the ways is if you get a case, such as a ticket that you've brought to court, reopened after it's done and closed. So how do you do that? What's involved? To find out, I consulted two legal experts, David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal, a legal services provider to the trucking industry. Well, guys, our topic here is how can I get a ticket case reopened if it's been closed? And I guess we should start with what are some of the typical situations in which someone might want to do this?
Well, certainly if you've got a commercial driver's license, you wouldn't want anything affecting that license. And if you have a ticket that has been closed, then chances are it is either about to report to your driver's license record or it already has been reported. You want to keep that record as clean as possible. So if something's already closed out, it might be hitting your score or your record, and that may affect your whole livelihood.
Okay. What are some of the instances where it's unlikely to get a case reopened? What are some of the instances where this just isn't going to happen?
Sure. So it's a really, really gray area. I think we've talked in a past segment about expungement, which is the possibility of removing an old violation off of your record. It's something that is more typical for criminal violations than it is for like traffic infractions, but there's always the possibility of doing it, and that's for older ones. So the younger it is, the more likely it is that you can get a quick turnaround, possibly reopen or restart the case and get it removed off your record.
What are some of the most likely instances where reopening is possible? Give us a few scenarios.
Mm-hmm. So normally in a situation where a ticket has been paid or a case has been closed with a guilty verdict within probably a month, you can file an appeal or set aside the judgment and try to reopen the case. Both of those are slightly different versions of the same result, which is that the case goes back to zero and you get another shot. And those usually have to happen within a certain short period of time, anywhere from maybe a week to 4 weeks, sometimes a little bit longer. And the reason for that is that the court sets a deadline about when a case can be appealed. And after that deadline, they say, no, it's not possible. Sorry, you waited too long.
I wonder if you can walk us through the procedure for getting a case reopened in that instance. What are the steps that you have to go through?
Sure. So if you're going to get a motion to set aside judgment, then you have to go before the judge. Really, all of this should be done with an attorney. Attorneys are much more familiar with the court systems, and in a lot of cases, even the people that are sitting in those places that they need to interact with. So a motion to set aside judgment would require you coming before the judge or your attorney doing that. Sometimes it can be done on paper, but most often it has to be a meeting and basically asking the judge to start over again, to set aside the first judgment and to start again. Now, an appeal is a little bit different. An appeal, you really do have to close out the first case entirely. And that usually means paying all of your fines, basically letting all the bad things that are going to happen to you. And then, if you're still within the deadline, filing a specific appeal paperwork with the court in order to actually kick it up into the next court higher and starting the case over from there.
How often is that successful when you try it?
That's a really good question. I would say overall, when our attorneys try these, it's because they already know that they have a reasonable chance of success. And that's why having an attorney is so important, because you can waste a lot of money and time doing something like this for no effect. But you'll want someone who is familiar just with the court that it's in. But if you're making an appeal, you'll want someone who's familiar with the court that's even higher, where the appeal would go to, so that you know, hey, this might have a reasonable chance of success. I'm going to spend my time and money on this, versus, hey, if I do this, it's still not going to go anywhere and I'm going to end up with the same result in 3 months' time.
Okay. You mentioned this earlier, but I want to reiterate, how long do you have to get a case reopened once it's been closed? I mean, what are the time limits? Not what's typical, but what are the kind of outside limits of this?
Sure. Outside limits, you may have as little as a week. You may have as much as 90 days. That is sort of the median range. I would say every once in a while, you will get extremely lucky and find yourself in a situation dealing with a court that will let you reopen a much older case. But that's very rare. I would say if I'm in a position where I have either failed to pay a ticket or deal with it, where I've been found guilty and I want to try again, I can't let this hit my license, I can't let this affect my livelihood, then I want to get on the ball as quickly as possible. Within the first week that I'm aware that the case is closed out, I want to do something about it.
I'm curious, are there states or jurisdictions that are more open to this type of thing than others? Where you're more likely to have a successful case, or is this pretty uniform across the board?
So,
hey, Mark, I'll jump in on this.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I have a fair amount of experience on this part of it. Texas, in Texas, and all of these rules that we're putting out there vary state by state. But in Texas, you have a lot of little courts where a prosecutor is beholden to a small group of people in his town or area in the municipality, and he won't deal with CDL drivers at all. They just don't do it. And then the attorneys will make an automatic appeal to a higher court, and the higher court might often have the same prosecutor, but his voters don't necessarily look at what happens in the higher court. They look at the lower court. And so it's pretty common in some of these areas of Texas. But again, every state has different rules, but that's the most common. We see it also in Atlanta. There's a Fulton County court, and it always gets moved to the state court, so that you have a better chance. But that's just an automatic process. They don't even, that's not even an appeal.
Are there some places where this is just a dead issue? It's not going to happen?
Yeah, I assume there is. There are places that, and also let me say one other thing. It's not just the place itself, but it's the conviction. It's the issue that you had. You're driving 95 and a 65. I mean, you can appeal it, but nobody, unless you have some proof, you found something that gives you at least some reasonable doubt, most attorneys probably won't even take something like that up.
One kind of important distinction between making an appeal like this and a motion to set aside judgment is that when there's a motion to set aside judgment, you're restarting the case with the same judge, same prosecutor, same court. When you're appealing, you do go to the higher court, but the new case is only about if the first judge was right or not. It's a slight difference from the exact same case, like were you actually speeding or not? In an appeal, you're trying to prove that the first judgment by the first judge was incorrect. So that's, again, why it makes a slight difference there, because with an easy open and cut thing like going 30 over through a school zone or something like that, the chances are you're not going to win anything like that on an appeal.
I want to explore a little bit the setting aside a judgment, because as you mentioned, you're going back to the same judge and the same prosecutor. It would seem to me that that's going to be a pretty high bar to cross. What do you need to have in hand to be successful at that? Because it just seems to me that they're going to be reluctant to say, yeah, we made a terrible mistake here. You're okay.
I think for success that we've seen for setting aside a judgment, it's less often that we are trying to show the prosecutor and the judge that they've made a terrible mistake, and it's more admitting that the driver has made a terrible mistake. What I mean by that is, oh, I forgot that I had this ticket, or I didn't see the court's letter when it came in, and I missed this, and I was found guilty by default. Okay, now I've come back, I had it in my hands, and I want to try to plead not guilty. Can you let me do that, please? I didn't really give myself a fair shot before, and you found me guilty in absence. So can I come and do this?
So if you're just going back and you actually were involved in the case and were represented in that court, you're not likely to get that one set aside.
That's correct.
Are there situations in which new facts coming to light could help get a case reopened?
There are. We don't actually see it very often. The reason is that a lot of traffic cases are pretty cut and dry. Usually you did what you did and it's pretty clear, or the officer has the ability to show up in court and say his side of the story, and the judge and the prosecutor will just kind of side with him on that. So it's rare that new evidence will come to light. Not something that typically happens with our cases that we see. And the reason for that is that most of the time we are actually moving to make an appeal, or make a plea deal in a case that will reduce the impact on the driver's record, regardless of what he's really convicted of. So maybe you were going 30 in or 30 over, and that's going to be terrible on your license. And the guy got you on a LiDAR detector, and like there's no way that you can ever submit evidence to show that you weren't doing that. But a good attorney can go into that court and get a plea deal, get it reduced down to maybe a 10 over. That's going to look way better on your driving record than the 30 over.
So it sounds like this is another case where prevention is key rather than trying to fix this after the fact.
Always.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, is there anything else on this topic that you want to add, or maybe I didn't ask about, I should have?
As you said, prevention is key. It's not always possible. Drivers are out there all the time, and they do this for their job. And so there are going to be situations where they're caught unexpectedly, either making a mistake or just in a bad situation. And as we said a couple of times in this segment, I would strongly, strongly encourage any drivers who find themselves in a situation where they have their livelihood at stake, their driver's license at stake, to go and find an attorney who can help them, who's well recommended and trustworthy, to be that local resource, to be that person who can help them navigate through court systems and try to find out the best paths. Maybe it's one of these paths, maybe it's another, but try to find out the best paths for them to protect their license.
Guys, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
I've been talking with David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal, a legal services provider for the trucking industry, about how to get a ticket case reopened if it's been closed. You can learn more by calling CDL Legal at 913-738-4836 or by going to their website, cdllegal.com. Again, that phone number is 913-738-4836 or cdllegal.com. And you can find all of that information on our website, landlinenow.com. Just click on the photo or headline in the red box. That's where you'll find all the phone numbers, email addresses, and website links that we mention on the show. Again, that's at landlinenow.com. We'll be back in just a moment with more news and information. Please stay with us through a short commercial break. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2024 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
If you're running ultra-low sulfur diesel in your vehicle, make sure you are prepared and protected all winter long with Howes Diesel Treat, the #1 anti-gel product in North America from the 100-plus year trusted brand Howes Products.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now. Welcome back. 3 important pieces of legislation supported by OOIDA have made it out of committee in the U.S. House of Representatives. Here to explain what the bills call for and why they're important is Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. Bryce, how are you doing?
Mark, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Very well, thank you. Let's kind of just dive right into these here. And the first of these bills deals with freight fraud. And this has been a growing problem in trucking. Can you kind of give us a brief overview of just how bad it's gotten at this point?
Yeah, it seems, I mean, you know, when we get our updates from what we're hearing from our member services and what our members are saying out on the road, it just is a constant problem and something that keeps growing. I also think it's interesting isn't necessarily the right word, but it seems like it's taking so many different forms, whether it's, scams, double brokering, or whatever else. So we know it's an issue. We know it's a big frustration for our members, and we know that it's a problem for everyone in the trucking industry, not just, owner-operators, not just carriers, but for brokers and, shippers, receivers, and everyone else who is having to deal with all of these bad actors that are out there.
Now, let's get into this bill here. Just tell us, what is this bill, who introduced it, and what basically will this bill do if passed?
Yes, so the bill is, don't be misled by the name, but it's called the Household Goods Shipping Consumer Protection Act. And it was introduced by Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton from Washington, D.C., and Congressman Mike Ezell from a Republican from Mississippi. So it's a bipartisan bill, Democrat and Republican leading it. And it does a few really important things. They may not seem earth-shattering, but it's a few important first steps to try and crack down on some of the fraud that we've seen. First, what it does is it restores FMCSA's authority to issue civil penalties against scammers and other bad actors. Without getting into all the details, basically through court cases and other decisions, FMCSA had that authority taken away and isn't allowed to take action against some of these scammers or against these scammers at all, really. So this is just, a kind of a basic first step to putting some teeth back into the enforcement of this. And I will say to highlight, I know anytime, and we're as skeptical as anyone else when you're talking about giving FMCSA enforcement authority or anything like that, but this is a very tight and narrowly tailored bill that just, again, gives that authority to FMCSA that they should have had before and that Congress intended for them to have to go after bad actors. And the other part of this bill that's important is it would require brokers, freight forwarders, and basically other entities that are registering with US DOT to use and register with a physical mailing address or a physical business address. This is something that motor carriers have had to do for a long time now. And so by extending that requirement to brokers, that should, again, hopefully start to cut down on some of the fraud that we're seeing out there. We know that this bill isn't going to be the silver bullet that solves all of the issues, but these are common sense first steps that should be taken.
Let's get into the second bill here. This deals with motor carrier records and violations. And let's just dive right in. What is the bill called and what would this one do?
Yes, so the Motor Carrier Safety Screening Modernization Act is legislation, and what's really important for us is that it would improve the data queue process and improve that process for carriers or drivers or whoever else is trying to contest a violation or a citation, to run through the issues that we've seen. And, I can understand for the frustration of any listeners that have had to go through this, but basically the data queue system, when you want to challenge a violation, you think there's been something that's incorrectly issued, you go through the system, and in many states, the review or the challenge to the citation is heard, and the second decision is made by the very same person who issued that citation in the first place. So you get an inspection from an officer, you think something's wrong, and you go to challenge it. That challenge goes right back to that same officer. And so there's not a whole lot of fairness or impartiality there. And so what this legislation would require is that states establish a system where someone else is conducting that review. So it's not going right back to the same officer who issued that ticket. And this is something that FMCSA themselves has suggested states do. They've held it up as a best practice to have kind of an impartial reviewer, but their states are not required to do so. So this legislation would finally require states to do that. And more broadly, the legislation would make information about a driver and a driver's record available to carriers. And so that's why we wanted to make sure that the information that's in those records is correct, because we know if you don't have good information, there's no way to make a good decision about a driver.
Okay, and we've got one more bill here that we did want to deal with. This deals with the EPA's push to get the industry to zero-emission vehicles. And this is targeting a specific rule by EPA, so I think it's probably important for us to remind people what that EPA rule is.
Yes, and so it's the rolls right off the tongue. It's the Phase 3 for greenhouse gas emissions for heavy-duty vehicles. But I'm sure most people are probably more familiar with it. As we've talked about it, it's basically EPA's mandate, or effectively a mandate for electric trucks, requiring that 25% of new heavy-duty trucks sold in the United States be electric by 2032. So what was passed out of the House Energy and Commerce Committee is a Congressional Review Act to repeal this rule. So Congress, in its oversight authority, they have the ability to pass these resolutions and basically undo what an agency has done. The one important caveat is that it's still like a law that needs to be signed into law like the president. So while we're certainly encouraged that the Energy and Commerce Committee pass this resolution, it's something we've been calling for them to do for a while, it's unlikely that this would be signed into law by the president, since it is his administration that has issued the rule. But at the same time, we think it's still really important to press the EPA and press the administration on how harmful this rule will be for small business truckers.
Well, let's talk about that very briefly here in some of the time we have left. OOIDA has identified a number of problems with this push toward electric trucks.
Yeah.
Can you just briefly give us some examples of some of the key problems and how they would affect the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know where to start, but I think the one that jumps to everyone's mind immediately is just the charging infrastructure is not there. So even if you had the money and wanted to go and buy an EV truck, if you're an owner-operator that operates throughout the country, you're not necessarily on the same routes or in the same areas of the country week in and week out, you need to have a wide network to charge your electric vehicle. But that is just not there yet. And so to basically mandate that all trucks be electric in the coming decade or so, it's just impossible to know how you would comply. And that really compounds with another concern that we have is the range of these electric vehicles. You know, there's a much lower range for these vehicles before they have to be charged again when you compare it with fueling up your traditional diesel truck. So not only do you have fewer options of where to charge, but you're also going to have to do it more frequently. So it's a logistics problem. It's a downtime problem because you're going to have to be spending more time stopping to charge. And there's just a whole host of other issues. You know, we hear from members who are in cold weather climates where you have battery performance that is degraded when it gets cold outside. So you're looking at even less range, even more problems, even more uncertainty. So just all around, I think the best way to sum it up is there's just so much uncertainty that, again, even if you wanted to try and make this work, if you had all the money in the world, there's just all these problems that are so much bigger than one truck operation that it's just not ready to go yet.
Okay. Well, Bryce, we've run out of time, but great information, and thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
I've been talking with Bryce Mungen of OOIDA's Washington, D.C. office. And folks, obviously, these are important issues that you want to get in contact with your members of Congress about, especially right now in the House where these have passed out of committee. They've got to be passed on the House floor. You can do that by using the website fightingfortruckers.com. Also, you can call 202-224-3121. That's our program for today. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome,
and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.